guys, and welcome to another Pro Prep Coaching Roundtable discussion. Today we're going to talk about peaking. We're going to talk about peaking for bodybuilding success, what that actually means. People call it tapering, the things that you should potentially do, things that you might not potentially do. We're fortunate today that we've got another member of the Pro Prep team on the call today. We've got Steph Noble. Say hello, Steph. Steph, I believe you're on mute. So,
I'm on mute. Hello, good. Yeah, I'm on here now. So hi, guys.
So Steph runs Pro Prep Coaching with myself, a very accomplished bodybuilder in her own right, and entrepreneur at the same time. We've got with us today the familiar band of Pro Prep experts. We've got Dave, Natalie, and Rob. And guys, if you like this content, be sure to check out the rest of our videos on the Pro Prep YouTube, our articles at ProPrepCoaching.com, and be sure to check out the other roundtable discussions we've done as well. And as always, if you find this content useful and you think that we can help you, then please don't hesitate to get in touch and reach out to us, and we can help you with all your coaching goals, be it body transformations, bodybuilding, or any other athletic pursuits. So that's our introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and Dave's going to take the floor on this one today. He's going to chair, and I'm going to join in on the debate.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. Now, the reason why I'm chairing and Andy is in the debate is because Andy has actually written a paper on the peaking strategies of natural bodybuilders, which you can find through Google scholarly articles and through any other kind of like accessible article online. It's really worth a read, especially for any aspiring bodybuilders out there. There's a lot of good information there. So, guys, this is really an open discussion, but it's one that is full of buzzwords and it's full of buzz phrases as well. So I think the simplest place to start, and I open this out to anyone, is what is a peaking strategy? Who can tell me that? Okay,
I'm going to come in here on this one because as you say, I have written a paper on this. I've also appeared on several podcasts talking about this one as well. And I think it's a great article. I wrote it on the Pro Prep Coaching website, which talks about the nuances of peaking as well. So peaking's not a new sort of concept in bodybuilding or for any other sport. The idea of peaking is to allow you to hit your peak for an actual event itself, to be able to perform better than you otherwise would be able to perform if you didn't do any strategy at all. Sometimes it's called tapering. Tapering is something that people talk about in our sports, and you hear about people tapering their training for a particular event. In the context of bodybuilding, we want to do it to look the best we possibly can for the event. And on the day at the contest, we want to have a look which we've got maximized the amount of muscle volume. So we call that fullness. We want to be diced, shredded, ripped, and we want to have a dry look. So that comes from a combination of low body fat levels, but also having a low amount of body water, subcutaneous fluid beneath the skin. So we want to have that as well. We want to have a tight waist, so you can see that nice six-pack and abs, and we've got that nice big V-taper, so we're not bloated. We also, at the same time, we want to be able to perform on the day at the event as well. So we have to have enough energy for that context at the same time. So peaking is all about manipulating macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, water, and alcohol to give your body the best sort of look you can. And sometimes you'll change the foods that you're regularly having during the week for your specific peaking plan. And then you'll also manipulate other variables like cardiovascular exercise and training. So that's peaking in a nutshell. Does that make sense?
And it's interesting because you say peaking is about performing your absolute best on the day you need to deliver. Now, if it's something like running, for example, being able to run the fastest, that's the one criteria you're looking to do. So, but when you look at bodybuilding, I mean, all those things you just mentioned, being full, being tight, being lean, being dry, I mean, it's a lot of plates to spin at the same time. So it is a reasonably complex process for us as coaches and for the athletes themselves to get it right. And there's lots of different things you can do, but there's also lots of different pitfalls that you can fall into as well. Now, you mentioned, obviously, in your bit there, Andy, about a lot of the different kind of elements that are included in a peak. So if you guys, and I'll go to you, Natalie, on this one, when you're putting together a peak plan for somebody, what is one of the elements you'll be looking at with regards to bringing those things to fruition?
So first, I think it's most important to look at where that person is at before they're coming into their peak, and kind of weighing up, you know, implementing a really intense strategy of kind of depleting and loading, whether it's the benefits from that are going to be great enough to outweigh obviously the toll it takes on the body during the week. You know, at the end of the day, if someone is not kind of, you know, perhaps lean enough, shredded enough before they come into peak week, then manipulating things, and potentially, as you say, there's many pitfalls around that if you go overboard with manipulating these variables, that actually for someone who is perhaps not quite there coming into peak week, is it worth, you know, playing around with things, and are we best off just keeping things consistent? And I think it's also a factor of considering there's the differences between obviously the different categories that people are competing in as to what look they're going for. So perhaps maybe someone who's doing sort of a bikini category, who doesn't need to be quite so kind of shredded and dry, etc. You know, are you going to go as extreme with that person? I think also if you've been, you know, fortunate enough to trial kind of loading in the forms of, you know, refeeds or high days in the past, you'll have a fairly good idea how well that person sort of tolerates an increased carb intake. So it is a very sort of individual thing as to how much I would manipulate those variables.
Now let's follow up on that, Natalie, before we finish. You spoke about manipulating things and how it can have a detrimental effect. What would you actually be manipulating within these people's diets and exercise regimes that could have potential positive and negative effects?
Basically, their carbohydrate intake is the main thing that I'd be looking at manipulating. Obviously, going through a kind of a depletion and then sort of a loading phase following that.
Let's make this completely civilian friendly. So loading and depletion. Let's explain what they are as we go along as well, so that a layman can watch this and understand every single thing.
So basically, like restricting carbohydrate intake to start off with the idea that you're depleting the glycogen in the muscles, and with that glycogen, you're also stripping out the water from the muscles as well. So potentially at the end of that phase, the person will look quite flat, obviously depleted, as I said, but the idea being is that when you then obviously start loading them with carbohydrates, that carbohydrate, because the muscle is depleted, should be shuttled into the muscle. And at that point as well, you kind of keep the water intake high, because obviously the muscles need water to transport that stored glycogen into the muscles. So kind of in conjunction with that, you also need to look at things like, this is where we've said about sort of fat intake and protein intake. So you would probably restrict fat intake at that point as well. So because what that does is the fat intake will obviously slow down the digestion of those carbohydrates. So you want to kind of encourage the gastric emptying to kind of keep the food moving through the digestive tract, avoid kind of any bloating, etc., that goes along with that. So it's all about kind of stripping out the glycogen, so you pump the muscles back up again when you start loading, and obviously just being careful not to go too far with that, because obviously someone can then do I'm trying to make it sort of civilian, but you can spill over, so you can end up looking very soft, so your definition will be washed out because you'll be storing excess sort of subcutaneous water.
And that's where the skill comes into it, and the experience of working with people. And as you said, having that kind of trial peak week, test these things to see how their body's going to respond. Now, for bonus points, and everyone here will know the answer, so this is an easy one. That kind of process of stripping all the carbohydrates out and then pushing lots of extra carbohydrates in, that's got a specific name and there's a science to it. Does anybody know what that's called?
So we refer to this as muscle glycogen supercompensation. So like if you want to go and read all this sort of stuff, then there is, like I say, there's a 6,000 odd word article on the specifics of this. But what we're doing is we're essentially trying to do what is called classical carbohydrate loading in some cases. And that's one strategy you can utilize. And it's the goal is to try and deplete the muscles of carbohydrates, glycogen, and then by depleting them, they then become hypersensitive to storing carbohydrates much more than your body otherwise would be able to store. So you get that compensatory effect. So your average person will store between 250 to 550 grams of glycogen in their body, so carbohydrate from there. So you can get about a 20 to 30% increase over and above that by doing these sort of depletion strategies. And you've got a whole array of muscle glycogen storage enzymes, and they get really upregulated along with a lot of transporters as well that transport that glycogen into the muscle at the same time as a consequence of this process, called hexakinases and GLUT1s and GLUT4s and things like this from there. So that's a bit of the science from it there, Dave.
And what it does is it ends up, if you think about this in the simplest term possible, it's like overfilling a balloon. It looks tighter, it looks fuller, it looks harder because it's got more glycogen in it, which is obviously air. Like you're fuller. Like that's the simplest way of putting it. Now, obviously, pushing additional carbohydrates in and doing that kind of super compensation is one strategy. Steph or Rob, what are other strategies you would use in peak week to help someone potentially bring their best to stage?
Do you want to go, Steph? I'll go. So I will touch on water manipulation. So we'll make this as simple as possible. You almost match your carbohydrate with your water intake in terms of your highest carbohydrate days. You'll match that with your highest water days. In terms of depleting water, you would never deplete it with your depletion meals at the start of the week. You would almost keep it baseline. So whatever you're doing throughout the week, it's when you get to that loading phase that we're talking about. As you're loading the carbohydrates, you're also going to load your water. So taking in probably a good couple of liters, if not almost double the amount of water that you might drink on a normal day. And there's probably a lot more science behind it, but the way I look at it, you're loading that water and you can eventually taper it off. So I'm talking the day before a show. In natural bodybuilding, you don't need to do a 24-hour water cut. So let's say the evening before, I'm pretty sure that's a usual thing among us coaches. The evening before, you will taper off that water quite significantly. So you might be drinking, for me, I'll take my example. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I was drinking baseline 6 liters. My first day of carbohydrate loading, I went up to 10. I then came down to 8 and then 6 the day before the show. And I got that 6 liters in before 6 p.m. the day before the show. And what my body was doing, again, explaining it to layman's, my body was used to taking in 6 liters of water. So it was flushing through 6 liters of water. And when I cut it out, it's almost like your body goes, I'm going to flush through this water because I think I'm going to get more. And then you eventually flush through the water, but without taking it back in. And that creates that tightness look.
Yeah.
I will let someone do the sciencey bit on that.
It's a compensatory effect in your body. It's like you're tricking your body into making changes that are going to make you look better on stage. With the carb deplete, I mean, the two examples are very, very closely linked. With the carb deplete, you give yourself very few carbohydrates so that your body and all the systems are like saying, give me more, and they store extra because they're worried they're not going to get it again. So you trick your body into pushing more carbohydrate into the muscles. Just like if you drink lots of water, your body goes, wow, 8 liters of water, 6 liters of water in a day. We need to push through this. And we know we're going to be very well hydrated, so we don't need to hold on to a lot of it. But then when you turn the tap off, it takes time for your body to realize there's no more coming in, and you can end up drying yourself out as a result, which obviously has beneficial effects from water under the skin to make you look drier and tighter on stage, just like you do with the carbohydrate loading. So it's very much about manipulating your body's natural systems. Would you agree, Andy?
No, 100%. And I think I loved your turning the tap off analogy, and thanks for the explanations as well, Rob. You're doing what's called polyuria. That's what you're trying to encourage. You're getting this diuretic effect. Drink a lot of water, you flush it out. We've all been there when we've been on a night out and drunk a lot of alcohol. It's not only the alcohol that's causing that diuretic effect, it's the amount of fluids that you're drinking as well. And then you turn the tap off, as you say, and the process keeps going. In terms of the carbohydrates and the fluids, as Rob says, you want to match them. Now, I've seen various different equations on this. I think we went with around about between 4 to 5 mils per gram of carbohydrate based on the molecular weight of a gram of carbohydrate and the amount which is stored with the fluid as glycogen in the muscle, but I've gone as high as 15 mils of fluid per gram of carbohydrate as well. And if you're having like 800 to 1,000 grams of carbs, you can end up drinking 15 liters of water in the day. And I've played about with it over the years, and you don't need to drink that much. You just don't. You can end up in sort of unfortunate positions whereby you end up with a little bit of hyponatremia, where you might get sore heads and things like this because you've just got overly dilute blood from there. But yeah, it's all a compensatory effect. Probably somewhere in the region of about 8 or 9 liters of water is probably enough, even if you're going up to about 1,000 grams of carbs.
And when you consider the average person struggles to get 2 liters of fluids in a day,
yeah,
it shows you it is a commitment, and it is very much, you've got to sustain and be consistent with this for it to work, because it's very different from your average.
It's
now,
like
Steph,
training.
there are obviously other strategies as well that you can use. You'll need to unmute for me. There you go. What are the other things you would take into account and think about when you were doing a peak week for someone?
That was one of the things that we just touched on. Have you got me back?
Yeah, we got you back.
Cool. So obviously your sodium is required as part of that, exactly what Andrew was saying, the sodium dependent glucose transporters to absorb those carbohydrates. So athletes should not reduce their salt intake just while carbohydrate loading, because well, again, it's many ways to skin a cat, right? You might want to consider increasing the sodium. However, that may cause the athlete to hold water. But then on the day of competition, you may want to actually increase sodium to help facilitate a better stage pump, for example, how full they might feel on stage as well. So on the face of things, it doesn't sound too really complicated, but it can be quite complex. And again, it's all of these tiny micro changes, depending on where the body is at and how they're going to respond to that. So there is quite a lot of practical considerations that we'd have to consider with salt loading, or, adding in salt at certain points throughout that peak week. And that has to be then very carefully managed alongside the water intake as well. So yeah, going back to that kind of classical carbohydrate loading consists of that depletion phase followed by a loading phase. Water intake usually increases alongside the carbohydrates and is decreased as an athlete gets closer to their show event. And so all these things together we're trying to get that desired look of looking nice and full, tight, lean, with no subcutaneous fluid on the frame. And you're hoping that a mix of these 3 things bring that result, depending on where of course the body has been at prior to starting that process.
And it's all linked. They're all very closely linked to each other because they're all part of the same processes within the body.
Yeah.
Because drinking a lot more water is going to reduce your levels of salts and vitamins and nutrients in your body anyway. So things like, for example, vitamin supplementation is sometimes important, especially if you're drinking 10 liters a day, like Rob was as well. So there's so many things to consider. And obviously, with such an intricate, complex system, there are lots of things that can go wrong. So that is my next question. Downsides and pitfalls to peak week strategies. Now, this can be specific examples, like the one we had with one of our athletes pushing through 3 liters of water in one sitting last year, or other people who end up looking really bloated because they've eaten too much fiber, or all your examples, because you're all prepping people, so you've all had these pitfalls in the past.
Okay, can I jump in with the first one?
Go for
it. Stress. I'm just going to put that's probably the major player for some of the reasons we might not see a peak come to fruition the way we want it. So, some individuals are getting really stressed and overcomplicated their plans, the plan that they might have. And I would say that because we're a team that work predominantly with a lot of first timers to the stage, this is something that we have to come up against with someone who's never done this before. They've got a lot to consider on top of a peaking plan. And sometimes, if their external factors are quite heavy, it can really ruin someone's look if cortisol is very high in the body and they're just flooding their system with this, stress hormone. So it's something that I see as one of the major players for, screwing up quite a good peak week.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
What about you, Rob? What do you
I'm
reckon?
glad you touched on
So definite pitfalls will be not being prepared during a peak week. So again, a bit more kind of obscure to probably some of the normal answers that you'd get, but be prepared for a long day if you're doing a lot of carbohydrates, and don't try and rush the process. Give yourself plenty time to get the carbohydrates in, give yourself plenty time to get the fluid in. The last thing you want is to be rushing it at the end of the day, because what you're going to do is it's that saying, you'll know what it feels like when you eat and drink loads immediately before going to bed. You're not going to get the most accurate look or weight in the morning. So give yourself plenty of time in them loading phases, and again, create a structure throughout the whole week, even for your depletion part of it as well. Make sure you're structured, you're prepared, and just give yourself plenty time to understand the plan.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about the amount of carbohydrates you're trying to get in as well, you need to break that down into enough meals so that your body is actually able to absorb the maximum nutrition from what you've eaten. Because if you have like 4 really big meals as opposed to 10 smaller ones, you won't actually be able to get all of the carbohydrates from within those meals. Some of it's just going to get flushed through your system. So as you say, Rob, you need to be organized to eat regularly across like a 12-hour day. So that's a really, really good point.
And that ties into the stress as well, because if you're preparing to reduce, preparation is key to reduction of stress, right? So I think if some of the things we see when people are preparing their food, they don't necessarily prepare their food even with high standards of hygiene, which can potentially affect their digestive, upset potentially. There might be things like I'm trying to think, we try to ask them to avoid reheating all starchy, carbohydrate-rich foods, for example, on the plan, and then avoiding rapid cooling of starchy foods to avoid the creation of that retrograde starch that we always go on about. These are things that a lot of first-timers aren't going to know. And certainly actually a lot of advanced athletes as well might not consider when they're preparing their food. Everything has to be to the letter and be very carefully prepared to avoid any issues that might occur in the actual visual of the physique itself. And of course, we have seen upset stomachs. We've seen people, not clean their foods properly, not cook their chicken properly. These are all, considerations that we take for granted. We just kind of make food on a day-to-day basis, but they really matter when it comes to something as extreme as that final stage look. And a lot of people also might have issues with foods they've not eaten before. Say you're switching a carbohydrate for one they've not eaten throughout their whole prep, and then suddenly you add that in. There might be issues around that. So there's so many small details that unless we really break this down and clearly say, I think we always tell our first timers, read the plan and then read it 10 times more, because there's always something that might trip them up. So preparation, key for reduction of stress. Those are 2 massive ones when we're talking about pitfalls, for sure. I've got a few others that I can think of too.
You prepped for 9 months, you've done the diet, you've gotten yourself razor sharp condition, and then because you haven't cooked your food properly, you end up with the shits and you look like crap on stage. You know what I mean? Like, that happens regularly.
It happens.
The guy at the show this past weekend, he was looking depleted because he'd had the squits because he hadn't done his food properly in the carb. And I mean, horror story that could have been, they didn't have a fridge at the place I was staying. So I took down chicken in a cool bag on Saturday, and then I was still eating it on Sunday afternoon when the cool bag wasn't cool anymore. And I was fine, but like, you shouldn't do that, because that could make you bloated, that could make you have a stomach upset. And that could be the difference between first and second, or it could be the difference between you looking good and not looking good at all. So really, really, really important. Natalie, I'm going to come to you next. What are other pitfalls or problems you've seen in the past from peaking and from the strategies that we've spoken about?
So I think there's kind of 2 things that you've already really touched on anyway, which was something I was thinking about, is like when you're traveling during, the tail end of your week, when you're loading as well and transporting the food and keeping that hygiene up. So that's already been touched on anyway, but that's again comes back to the preparedness and having a plan in place as to what you're going to do. But I think I'm probably coming at it from, experience of sort of working with first timers, and really managing their expectations as to the changes that are going to happen, you know, during the peaking process, because it'll add to the stress. Say if they look at themselves after the first day of carb loading, and you're not going to look fantastic after the first day of getting those carbs in. So to manage your expectations and kind of say, you can expect to feel a little bit bloated, you know, you will look a bit watery, etc. So don't panic, that's totally normal. So I think that's one thing that's always been really key for me, is to walk people through day by day and say, this is what you can expect to see, and it's normal, and don't panic. Because I think that can be the thing, that they'll look in the mirror or they'll step on the scales, not connect what they're doing with their diet with how they're physically looking, have a stress out, have a panic, and think I've ruined everything. You know, so that's been the big one for me, is managing those expectations throughout the week, I think.
Absolutely. And when you think about how scale bound people are with regards to their progress, they only think they're doing well if they're low on the scale. And suddenly in peak week, once you start filling up those muscles, you can gain almost 2 kilos sometimes, maybe even a little bit more, and they think they've blown it.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, and also it's one of the reasons why, as part of the ProPrep protocols, during peak week, at the end of your deplete, send photos to your coach in the AM, and then after day 1 of carb up, send photos in the evening, and then each morning and evening afterwards, so that we can monitor their look and obviously adjust things if needed to make them fuller, or if it looks like they are going to spill over. See, we can use these buzzwords now that we've explained them. Or if they're going to spill over, we can then obviously pull things back to make it adjustable for them. No, absolutely. Very good point. Andy, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, of course. I'll come in here. I mean, there's been so many great things that's been put in this particular roundtable discussion. I mean, you can talk about the physiology, the science of all the sort of stuff that goes down, but Steph touched on this about the practical considerations. Natalie, Rob, and yourself have talked about this as well. Just the nuts and bolts of it, though, and how you make it all matter, and how you can overlook just things like food hygiene, stress, things like this, and athlete education level. Are they ready for a peak plan that's severe? How complicated are you going to make it? How stressed are they going to get? All these things matter, and the more shows you do, the more experience you get. I take for granted that I've been doing this since 2006 and traveling for a lot of shows. I know all the pitfalls that you're talking about with things like taking cool bags and all this sort of stuff with me, and that's all that all those things contribute to that well-rounded athlete that understands and can just focus on the job of doing the competition on the day. So I think, guys, really excellent stuff. I'm going to come in with something on here. When Barack Obama was in charge of the United States, okay, when he was president, his cabinet had a motto, right? And the motto was, don't do dumb shit. Okay, that they weren't making policy decisions on that, but when they were ever going to go and do some sort of idea and say what you want about his politics, they would always sort of ask themselves, is this stupid? Is this a good idea or not? And I think one thing you can take away from this is that there's a lot of precision, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of spinning plates, and there's a lot of potential places where you can have pitfalls and things can go wrong. Yeah. So common mistakes and things like that, where I see people getting things wrong, is when they're so precise on every single thing, and then they'll come to the end of the week and they'll do stuff for the contest, like they'll just go and have free McDonald's.
Yes, I had that written down.
Yes, like, so I mean, my lifestyle clients, I mean, we've all been there at 2 in the morning and the only place opens McDonald's after a night out, and you have that McDonald's, and afterwards you feel awful, you're bloated, you're sluggish, you get spots on your face. Like, my lifestyle clients notice this sort of stuff then after a few weeks of eating pretty healthy, and then go back to eating a little bit of junk food. They don't feel good the next day. So why you'd go and try and think that this could be a good strategy of just cramming a whole load of junk food in yourself the night before an event, I don't know. I'm not sure. So that's a classic one, the junk food strategy. And when you review bodybuilders and the strategies that they utilize, thankfully, that's a very small percentage of people will do that sort of strategy on there, because this isn't the 90s anymore. Like, no. We've moved on from that sort of stuff. And if you want to manipulate things like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and sodium, then you could do it in a way in which you know what you're actually eating. Yeah. So that's one thing. So don't do dumb shit, right? Don't start eating a whole bunch of foods that you've never eaten before. You don't know how you're going to react. That's a sort of classic one as well. Don't do silly things like covering your body in deep heat on the day of the competition. Because again, have you ever put deep heat on? Like, you might think you're going to get a little bit more vascularity and stuff like that, but you don't want your whole body to go red and you feel uncomfortable and you have like a reaction. Yeah. Like these things happen. Alcohol. I often recommend a small glass at night because sometimes it takes the edge off things. Some people will drink a heavy amount of spirits the night before on the day. I mean, we've all had a hangover. When you're going to perform at your best, that's not something that you want to be able to do. So just these are a few examples, but just when you're making your strategy and you're putting it together, like just stop and think. That's where people I think go wrong. They don't stop and think. They don't ask the questions and go, is this a good idea or not? Is this dumb? Yeah, don't do dumb shit. That's
the benefit of having a coach there as well. They've made the plan, they guide you through the plan, and they're there as a sounding board for any of these stupid ideas before you actually put them into practice. I mean, my horror example is exactly as you said. One of my friends, before his competition, he drank a big glass of wine and then had another one. And because he'd been on a depletion diet and he was so skinny, he ended up having to go to hospital and get his stomach pumped the night before the show. And we'd almost driven all the way there. And then we got the call, I'm not competing, I've had to go to hospital. We turned around, drove nearly all the way home, got the call again, I'm going to go for it. And then we drove back. And obviously it meant he didn't bring his best look to stage. And that was 9 months of blood, sweat, and tears, money spent on a coach, accommodation, travel, federation. It's not cheap. And it's a big commitment. And to blow it on something as simple as I had an extra glass of wine before I went to bed. Don't do dumb shit. That's a great tagline for the episode.
I can give you another anecdote. There's a guy I know, a lovely guy, good bodybuilder. First bodybuilding contest he ever did. He traveled down on the train to go to his event, to do the contest, carbohydrate loading, doing all this sort of stuff. He's not a great traveler anyway, gets stressed. He managed to get a lot of motion sickness, ended up totally ill, dehydrated, didn't do this contest in the end. Okay, such a shame. First thing ever doing it. There's probably question marks thinking, well, was it a good idea to travel in the first place, doing it this way, given that your motion sickness passed? Second time he competes, exact same thing happens. Same strategy, doing the same thing. He's done it a third time now. I mean, like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Like, so there's got to be some sort of analysis, some reviewing of everything that's going on here to sort of say, right, okay, well, what can we do? That's the advantage of peaking for one contest, trying different things out as along the way. That's a real advantage. But like, that's our classic example of don't do dumb shit. We should be doing that.
Yeah. Now I've got one more kind of topic for us to discuss, and then there'll just be a few quickfire questions. And this one is quite an interesting one. How do you choose what type of peaking you do with what client? Now, to give some context here, obviously, Andy, you've been coaching me for the whole bunch of shows I'm doing this season. I'm doing 6 shows this season, all in, not including Vegas. If I make it to Vegas, we'll see. But each peak has been different. Each peak has been different. Some have been harder than others. And I haven't really done a proper aggressive deplete yet. So, and this can go to everyone, but we'll start with yourself, Andy. And we'll say one thing, so we'll leave something for everyone. When you're looking at what kind of a peaking plan you're going to make for people, what elements do you take into account when planning it?
I just go first, because then I will have to jump away.
Oh, yes. Tell care duties. Go for it, Rob.
My point, and you can discuss it when I've maybe gone, is the whole front load versus back load of a peaking plan and the advantages to both. So I'm sure. And also, my last thing I'm going to say before I go is the old Shakespeare quote. We all know it: to peak or not to peak. That's the question.
Good one.
What a great way to finish, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your contributions, buddy.
No problem.
Take care.
Thank you. Enjoy, everyone.
Thanks. Steph, you can come in and answer this one from that left behind.
Okay, let's see practical considerations for choosing a peak for a particular client. So, I mean, the very first thing I'm going to look at is what class they're doing. That's the very first thing. I mean, with that, we've touched on that already, but bodybuilders, of course, we need to kind of be thinking, using a strategy that allows, or we think will bring them in dry, full, hard, looking, you know, as physically ripped as possible. While sort of with my bikini athletes, I'm only going to be looking for maybe tightness and some tone through the muscle, rather than that kind of shrink wrap, dry, really hard ripped look. And we also have to consider like where they are genetically, how lean they are already is going to determine the type of peak. It might not even be a proper peak strategy. It might be that we take their potential low days that they're currently on and keep utilizing those, so it's not much of a change, and we just keep kind of driving towards the day without much change at all. That's some principles I would take. So the first one really is just what class and what is the criteria of the class, and what do we need to do to make sure that we hit as close to the criteria as possible, so that we do not give the judges an opportunity to say they were too lean or they were too full, or, you know, so we've got to kind of get to where that was and hit it as best we can.
No, absolutely. And I'll come in next, actually. And this is a slightly different one. The resilience of the athlete. And sometimes this comes from experience as well, having done it before. There is no point doing a super aggressive depletion plan with someone who isn't tough enough to do it. Because for some people,
mindset's huge.
Yeah, the difficulty of going through those low carb days while doing hard training, while doing cardio, the stress of that's going to be so much that their cortisol production will boost, or they'll end up breaking and they'll have something off diet. So like, you've got to kind of like match the difficulty of the plan with the toughness and the capability of the competitor. And I mean, the peaking plans I would say I would be capable of doing now are much, much harder than the ones I would say I was capable of doing even say in 2019. So it's very much like knowing your athlete and making the plan based on their capabilities as well, both mental and, as you said, physical as well, where they're currently at and where they need to be. Natalie, what do you reckon?
So I think you probably touched on the other things that I would definitely say about the individual and their mental outlook. But I think the other consideration is, how many shows are they doing? Which shows are we really wanting to push it for? You know, for example, if they've got another one coming up in a few weeks' time, do we want them to be, you know, obviously, because coming out of a full-on peak, you're going to be kind of drained and not feeling at your best for a little while afterwards. So do we want to push for this one, or do we want to go into this one gently, kind of cruise in and kind of save the real push for, you know, their final show of the season? So I think it's, and what have they done beforehand? So like, how are they feeling physically? And like you say, can they tolerate it?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because the whole point of a peak is you're there and then you come back down. Maintaining a peak for a long time, it's very, very difficult, borderline impossible. And it's where that strategy element comes in. Okay, so this is the one we really want to peak for, you know, so we're going to use this as an opportunity. Or you go, we're going to do a few shows, and then like we've done with myself, Andy, have this one in the middle where we just refresh your physique by giving you more food, knowing that we've got a long season ahead of us, and go from there. So it's tactical as well.
Yeah, 100%. About managing the athlete completely. I mean, one thing I'll say is peaking causes you to lose a bit of momentum as well. If you're on a trajectory where you're losing weight, losing body fat, as soon as you start doing multiple shows back to back, that tends to stop that process, the process of gaining or losing body fat. So, and it can be difficult for people to get that momentum back sometimes as well. I totally agree with what you're saying, Natalie, and yourself, Steph. So I've not got really anything to add on that one. Carb backloading versus front loading, that just simply refers to the day of the week, how you're going to put the carbohydrates into the body. So off the back of the deplete, you either put them in front load wise, so you put them all in initially, or you put them in retrospectively a few days afterwards. The science would suggest that front loading is the best, because that's when you're going to be the most susceptible to be able to have muscle glycogen supercompensation rather than the other way around. Practically, probably makes sense to do the front load as well, because if you do the back load and it goes wrong, then you've got nowhere to go.
Yeah, you've got no time to fix it and to dry out. Yeah,
exactly. So I'll say on that. And so it does come into that peak or not to peak, depends on how many shows that you're doing in the season, how long the prep is, the resilience, what the athlete's education level is, their own stress levels. And that's the beauty of working with a coach and getting that feedback from a coach which is receptive to listen to you and is willing to be collaborative rather than someone that's just going to take a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to remember as well is that a peaking plan is not going to transform your body. It's not going to make someone who's not lean. It's only going to really elevate someone who's really lean to the best of their potential. So if you go into peak week and you're not quite there, it's not going to be the magic fix. And so it's being aware of that as well. And that kind of saves disappointment, because some people, they kind of delude themselves into thinking, oh, I'm a little bit soft, peak week will fix it. It doesn't. You got to be ready before peak week starts. 100%. Now, I had a few kind of like yes or no things written down here, but most of it has actually been covered already. We've obviously spoken about salt loading and obviously time and a place, but obviously it needs to be done in collaboration with all the other areas. I mean, a guy who was competing last year that I was doing his drug test at the WMBF Supernaturals, he told me he'd had 8 grams of salt that day, which was hell of a lot. And for me, that's too much. But again, he did very well. He won his class. So what do I know? But, you know, and it's about like safety and health at the same time as well. And obviously water loading and restriction, there are downsides to drinking huge amounts of water, but there are benefits as well. So it's about managing it in relation to everything else you're doing. But I do have one question for you guys. Would you ever do an aggressive carb deplete that lasted longer than 3 days?
Oh, can I go on this? Yes.
Yeah.
I would. The rule is, generally speaking, and it seems to be kind of true from my experience, that it takes as many days to fill up as it takes to deplete. That seems to be kind of true.
Okay.
So if you get really depleted, then it can be hard to fill up. What the carb deplete will do for you is, as well as having that carbohydrate super compensation, is it causes your body to go maybe potentially to ketosis, and you do get a little bit of fat burn there. Beyond what you otherwise would normally get. So maybe your peaking strategy is based around, okay, maybe I can get this person a little bit leaner, and maybe they're not going to be so full on stage, but I can get them leaner by doing this, and that might be a good look for them. So I would say, yeah.
Okay, cool. You guys agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, nice one. And I've got another one here, and this is one of those ones that like really, it gets on my nerves when I see it online. A lot of guys who go through saying they've gone their whole prep without doing any cardio. And this is when they aren't counting steps and NEAT, which is non-exercise assisted thermogenesis, is just basically things you do to burn calories that aren't running on the treadmill or on the stepper or whatever. Would you go for a no cardio prep?
They're lying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Like, I mean, I've always kind of called bullshit on this one. I think, you know, there's a multitude of ways to prep, of course, and it all depends on your starting point. Maybe somebody who is coming from an extremely, you know, tight, lean place before they even get into this might need minimal amounts. But, you know, what is cardio? If you're using steps and you're saying I'm doing 10,000 steps a day, and you're calling that sort of your just average step count, but you're purposefully doing it, that's strategic cardio still.
I agree.
You know, you can't say I'm just doing steps and I'm not doing any cardio, but you are, because you're trying to hit a 10 or 12K step count. So that is cardio. So I think there's different kind of ways people like to sort of say they're not doing cardio, but they actually are. And I haven't seen any amazing bodybuilders in my time, natural bodybuilders, who have managed to get to the stage without having to do some strategic cardio alongside the diet manipulations and, you know, the training intensity styles that they're using. Yeah, it's something you got to do if you want to get in shape. It's just part of the process. And
it also allows you to keep your food higher if you're doing some cardio. And it is that protein and carbohydrate that's going to cause, it's that they're muscle sparing nutrients, which means you'll be able to retain your muscle for longer. And when you're essentially strategically starving yourself, you are going to lose muscle if you're not eating enough. And if there's no cardio, there's no strategic step, no like prescribed steps, your food's going to have to go pretty down low to get stage lean. So yeah.
It's a discussion between what counts as physical activity and what counts as exercise. And the World Health Organization would just simply say, if it's planned with a purpose and a goal, then it's exercise.
It's exercise.
And if it's just you going around the house doing your daily activities and then it's physical activity. And if I decide to take the stairs, that counts as exercise.
Yeah. In agreement, Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I always look at the cardio and kind of the low intensity stuff as being, good from a health perspective anyway, regardless of anything else. Forget about, so I would never recommend that people do none, full stop, and like you're saying, it could just be walking, that's amazing. But yeah, I would never think of taking cardio away. I think you have to do it from a health perspective as well. So
yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So the last one, you kind of already answered this before, Andy, but having a cheat meal or a dirty meal the night before a show, would you guys ever get your clients to do that or do it for yourself?
Absolutely not.
Natalie?
No, because where does that stop as well? Before you know it, eating at every fast food place in town and have 10,000 calories. So
yeah. I mean, it comes from the old YouTube days of bodybuilding from the early 2000s, where you saw all the guys on the gear and they would be going to like McDonald's or Pizza Hut and filling their faces the night before the show. And the goal is to boost the salt, boost the carbohydrate count, boost the sugar so that they can look full and vascular, but it's just not precise enough.
I think we've come a really long way from that, like a really long way. We've got evidence-based papers on this stuff now. We've got people discussing strategies for the best way to get in shape. I just think that for a lot of reasons why we've discussed in this round table talk today, you can't control the variables of a meal that you've not prepared yourself, that's full of additional things that your body hasn't maybe had for near on potentially a year worth of contest prepping if you're a natural bodybuilder. And it's just you're taking a serious gamble. And is it worth it? I just think that we've come a long, long way from that. And there's more education and understanding out there of how to do exactly the same thing whilst controlling the variables, preparing your own food and getting the exact same, if not much, much better and more precise outcome.
And then you're not risking your 9 to 12 months of hard work,
exactly.
Your travel, your federation fees, yeah, totally agree. Good. That was an easy one. That was a slow roll, that one. So
sorry, Dave, I just pull you up for this. You said the old YouTube days. I just thought that was an oxymoron. I was like, the old YouTube days of bodybuilding. I was like, wait a minute. I started bodybuilding before YouTube was even a thing. Google didn't even
my personal experience. Yeah, when I was a lad, when YouTube first came on the scene.
I mean, I think if you look at like someone who's a 300-pound bodybuilder, like the guys like a Ronnie Coleman and stuff like that, the amount of muscle someone like that's got compared to your 60 to 75 kilogram natural bodybuilder, completely different. So the capacity and the ability to absorb someone like that is two different things. And I think unassisted bodybuilding, guys will quite happily take diuretics to overcome some of the negative effects which are associated with that sort of stuff. It comes from the untested side of the sport, and as Steph says, the risk reward, I mean, it's devil may care. It's not worth it. Not worth it.
No, agreed. Okay, so yeah, we've gone through peaking strategies, what they're composed of, problems that can arise during peaking, things to look at, and obviously how you choose what kind of peaking to use for your client. Does anybody have anything else that they think would be useful to add?
I had one, when we were talking about pitfalls section, I had one other to add in, but it wasn't, we went on to something else before that. And this is specifically for the females, but the menstrual cycle being a huge one for where we might have a pitfall on a show day or close to show day. And it's something I've come up against quite a lot with a few of my clients who have either had, their period on the day, or because of the fluctuations in your hormonal patterns through menarche as you get leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner, we have a whole myriad of things that might occur. So I think I just wanted to make a little bit of a point on, there's not a lot of things we can do to stop period, but there are a couple of, if we know a female is quite regular and even into the depths of being extremely lean, which I've had some athletes lose menarche, some don't, and it's not a sign of whether you're getting lean enough or not. But I think some women can now take some steps, if we know when it is, to actually prolong the period. And it's a pharmaceutical intervention that you can get from the pharmacy. A lot of women who are, maybe getting married or going on holiday, etc., they all use it as a strategy to prolong their period from coming when they've got an event coming up. It's something called norethisterone. Norethisterone is it's like a period delay pill, basically. And it's something that I've utilized with 2 of my clients. It's worked pretty well, but it's not something that you ideally want to take, because again, it could potentially have implications to the outlook of the physique as well. It's something else you're putting in your body, right? But I just wanted to kind of put another point there for something that might be a pitfall specifically for the females, because it's something we have to watch. And being a female coach is something, menarche is a huge part of the coaching process with that.
Absolutely. No, really important to add that. Absolutely.
I would just say, coming out of the other side of it, if it's one show for that year, have a strategy. And then finally, dehydration is massive usually with these strategies. People normally don't feel right for a couple of days afterwards from that dehydration. So make sure you've got some sort of hydration strategy like the other side.
Okay, that's good. Natalie, anything else you can think of that we didn't chat about?
No, I think probably pretty much covered everything. So I haven't got anything to add.
All right, nice one. That's been really good. I'll hand back over to you, Gaffer, to close the show. Thank you for letting me MC.
Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, guys, so thank you very much for listening to our roundtable discussion on peaking strategies. Guys, if you like this and you think that we can help you, please do go and check us out at www.ProPrepCoaching.com. You can catch us on Instagram as well at ProPrepCoaching, and we're on Facebook at the same time. Check out the rest of our content on our website and on our YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Andrew Spell. You can find me at Fueled by Scott Soaps on Instagram. We've got Stephanie. What's your Instagram?
Steph_Noble Figure Pro.
Dave.
David T, personal trainer.
And Natalie.
Natalie Woods 1804.
And Rob does bodybuilding. You can find him on the gram as well. Thank you very much for your attention, guys. We hope you found this useful. Peace out.